Hey there, welcome to the DFS build UFL edition. We've only been doing UFL DFS picks and strategy videos for a few weeks, just because we're busier with NBA and NFL early in the year when UFL is going on. But hey, better to be at the stretch run than not at all, right? Yeah. So this is conference championship week. So the nice thing is we know nobody's gonna be resting or being limited or anything like that. And if you're hurt, you're probably gonna play because they're playing for a chance to go compete for basically the UFL Super Bowl. So I would imagine most of the injured guys that are kind of questionable should play. There is actually one big injury that we should monitor. Having said that, Chase Garbers for San Antonio is questionable. He got knocked out of the last game, I believe. I believe so. Yeah, he had 1.1 fantasy points due to that. He has a wrist issue. Obviously, never something you want to see for a quarterback. He was limited participant in practice all week, so it seems like he'll probably go. And right now, based off of the projections at Roto Grinders, that's what I would imagine. If he doesn't go, and this is all I will really say about this guy, but Quentin Dormady at 8.7K would be viable and probably low owned. I shouldn't say that because the savings you're getting with him, if he does come in, if he did end up starting at 8.7K, he might carry some ownership. I don't really like playing him. He has not been very good on the year. He had that one crazy game basically when he was chalk, and I was like, don't play him. And he had 26 fantasy points, just ridiculous. So I don't really have a hard lean other than the fact that if he did end up playing, it's obviously a huge game and he's super cheap. So if you have a bunch of other studs that you really want to pay up for, like load up on guys like Hakeem Butler and Jandre Kirkland, and then go get the top running backs on the slate, you could do that. So definitely in play if he ends up starting. But right now, I do think it's going to be Chase Garbers at 9.7K. I think Garbers a little bit priced out for me. It's worth noting that he's not going to be very owned. Obviously, the injury has something to do with that. But there's two guys who just are better plays than him. The ownership makes me interested. If I'm running a lot of lineups out there, I definitely want to get some leverage on the crazy Adrian Martinez ownership coming at 47% owned. It's warranted. He's got an amazing rushing floor. He's been super productive both on the ground and through the air. Dude's averaging 21.8 fantasy points per game on the year. The only other quarterback in this league that's even remotely close to him would be AJ McCarron. And he's not, terrible. Obviously, behind him at 18.7, he's very, very good. So I'm just looking at those two guys for the most part. I do think for tournaments, Garbers or Dormady, if he ends up starting, they're fine. Danny Etlin's there, but not really interested in that. He did have a pretty good game in his last game. I believe it's in the same exact matchup. Yeah, against Birmingham. He had 21.4 fantasy points, so you can't ignore that with the savings and no ownership. So it is what it is for tournaments. You could go that way, but for me, I'm just keeping it pretty simple. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to Adrian Martinez, and then I think AJ McCarron only 24% owned is very, very interesting as a leverage play there. So, nice thing is they both have the two best projections. They both have the two most expensive price tags. They're the two chalkiest guys. So it's just like I'll just eat that chalk and maybe be slightly underweight actually on Adrian Martinez and go a little bit overweight on AJ McCarron. But really, I'm splitting the ownership between those two guys. That way, I feel pretty good that those guys will get it done. And then the rest of my lineups, I'll get different in a different way out there. All right, so moving on to running back. Let's see. So the main guy right now looks to be Morgan Allison. He's coming in with the best projection because Anthony McFarland has a shoulder issue and is questionable for this game. He's figuring to be a game time call. So, like I said, I would imagine he plays. I would imagine any of these guys that are like somewhat on the fence of playing, I would imagine they play with such a big game. But if he's out, then yeah, Morgan Nelson looks great. I mean, Roto Grinders doesn't even have McFarland in the projections right now, which might be a mistake just because we don't know if he's going to play. So here's the thing. He has 15 plus fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. And he's shown really nice ability as a receiver. He's shown explosiveness, and he's shown the ability to carry full load. Last game, he had 15 carries for 82 yards. I mean, they have no qualms about just like feeding whatever guy is back there. So I think honestly, if McFarland's in, he's going to be the one that's really, really chalky, just because he's displayed an immense ceiling and he's garnered like a really big role when he's been healthy. And he's only 8.2K. It's not like you're breaking the bank to pay for a guy who's been very productive and should have a huge role in a massive game. Now, if he is out or limited, then Morgan Elston looks amazing at 7.2K. It's really, really tough to get away from. 71% owned is tough to eat, but I think on a 2-game slate, I'm going to eat that chalk. I think that is good chalk at 7.2K. I still like McFarland quite a bit, and I would definitely like to update the ownership projections on Saturday just to gauge, actually, one of these games is on Saturday and the other's on Sunday. So you're going to have to make those decisions early, though, because the first game's at 2 in the afternoon. But right now, as it stands, Ellison looks awesome. And if McFarland is out, I will eat that chalk. Next up at running back is Jacob Sailors for St. Louis. No problem with Jacob Sailors in general, although he's got the toughest matchup for running backs on this, on the slate, and he's not cheap. He's the most expensive running back you can get at 8.6K. So this actually feels like chalk for me to fade. He's had some really, really good games, so it's really tough to get away from him. He has 3 games over 21 fantasy points. He had 21 fantasy points 2 games ago, 104 yards rushing, and he had another crazy game where he had 29 fantasy points with 3 touchdowns. So definitely a ceiling there for sure. But when you look at the ownership, I don't want to eat 2 chalky running backs up top when it comes to spending money. So I think between the 2, I would rather actually eat the Morgan Ellison chalk because I'm saving 1.4K and I feel better about his role and projection with McFarland probably out, or assuming McFarland is out. And honestly, if McFarland would in, I would just flip it. And I'd go play with McFarland and I would fade Sailors here. And when I say fade, that's if I'm doing a single entry. If you're rolling out many lineups, I would still get some exposure to Jacob Sailors because that'd be really annoying if he just pops off for like 30 fantasy points and we don't have any of him. But I will just be underweight there. Ricky Person is, I guess, viable here. I mean, I don't really want to play him though. He's basically splitting the work with Marable here, who's coming off a pretty nice game, 23 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns scored, 10 carries for 56 yards. So he's the one carrying more ownership. He's only 300 more. I mean, actually, his ownership projection, I don't think we can trust that right now, obviously. But the projections their actual points projections are very, very similar. CJ's $300 more, so it's possible he'll be less owned, but his recency bias will have him looking like the safer play because he's coming off the better game. It's tough to gauge it because I think they're going to be in a bit of a timeshare here. I think if it comes down to ownership, I would just go with CJ there. But I think, either one of these guys could be a hit, and or they could just eat into each other and not really pan out. Let's see who else. McCrary is popping because he's only 6K. He's coming in with a 10-point fantasy projection. He's super chalky at 50% owned. So, like I said, if I'm only going to play 2 running backs, and you only have to play 1 in this lineup construction. If I'm going to play 2, I'm probably going to play Morgan Ellison, and then I'm going to play one of those Birmingham running backs to pair with Adrian Martinez. But yeah, I don't really want to eat that chalk with McCrary. He has a good price. He does offer some value for sure, but it just feels a little bit trappy. I mean, last game he had the most carries he's had all year with 8. And his best game in 4 games on the year is 10 fantasy points. So it doesn't feel super, super good. And obviously, like I said, I think he's going to split. He's going to split the work there. I'm sorry. I was talking about Person and Marable, but no, he's also going to split the work with Colburn. So Colburn did not get a lot of work last week, but the week before he had 24 carries for 2 touchdowns, 23 fantasy points, 18 fantasy points the week before that. So honestly, I don't really know why he's not in the projections here. I would like him a decent amount at 7.7K, certainly a lot more than the chalky McCrary, unless we catch wind that Colburn is limited or out for some reason. I'm not really sure why he's not coming in the projections, but I would look to update that. Here, I'll just refresh real quick on the fly here. But I would look to update that before you lock lineups tomorrow or Saturday morning. Because I would anticipate him being a lot more viable than what the current projections are suggesting. I don't think there's anybody else at running back that really pops for me. Yeah, I'm not really interested in Wayne Gallman. Not getting enough work behind Jacob Sailors, and nobody else really stands out. Wide receiver is going to be interesting because there is a lot of ownership up top, as there should be, but it's just going to be interesting to see where people go with the running back salaries and also with two really, really good plays at quarterback. So I'm going to have some of my money tied up at quarterback right away. If I slide Adrian Martinez in there, and I'm also going to go get Morgan Ellison. Like I said, I don't know if I feel like I have to get a second running back in there, but if I'm going to play one, I'm going to eat the Morgan Ellison chalk and move right along. And then, just because I don't want to spend too much time on defense, if I'm playing any defense here with confidence, it's probably going to be the one that's going up against Danny Etling, just because I don't really trust him that much. And he's coming off a really good game against this very defense, but I don't know if I really trust him to repeat that. Oh, so that would leave me with 6.9K across the rest of my roster, which obviously would keep me interested in McCrary just because he's super cheap. But moving over to wide receiver, we got Hakeem Butler, just looks like a beast like usual. He's actually been really quiet lately. He has had more than 7 fantasy points in any of his last 3 games. Some of that has to do with the fact that AJ McCarron just hasn't been healthy. So AJ McCarron's back now, obviously, and this is a massive playoff game to go to the championship. So I have interest in Hakeem Butler, even though he has the worst matchup for wide receivers on the board in this 2-game slate. But he just has monster red zone chops. He obviously 1 or 2 touchdowns, and he's going to be a smash play. So I like him a lot at 10K. He's probably the only wide receiver up top that I feel super, super confident in. And naturally, he has the best projection. He's carrying 34% ownership. That feels kind of low, to be honest, on this 2-game slate for a guy who can absolutely break the slate, especially when you're looking at guys like Jontre Kirkland and Corey Pearson, who are certainly capable of blowing up, but feel a little bit overpriced for who they've been on the year. I mean, Pearson has not been that dude. He has 1 game over 10 fantasy points in the entire season. Kirkland, it's worth noting, has really, really turned it on lately. And obviously, you compare him with Adrian Martinez, so it's going to be tough to go away from him. I don't know how realistic it is to pair Butler and Kirkland together in the same lineup, but if you can do it and punt at running back or something, it certainly sounds fun. But I think Butler would be my preferred play just because he projects better, he has a better ceiling, and he's going to be a little bit less owned. But Kirkland looks good. I mean, 28.7 fantasy points in his last game. He's had 10 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. And he has 2 games all year where he was under 10 fantasy points. So last game was a bit of an outlier, though, because he scored a touchdown. And he hadn't scored a touchdown since week 2 before that. So not really the touchdown monster that Hakeem Butler can be. He can be a PPR demon. He had 7 catches on 10 targets last game. But that was his most catch count since week 3 when he had 8. So I don't know. I'd imagine with the playoff game, being huge for everybody, that he'll show up, but it's not an easy matchup. He's got the toughest matchup for wide receivers. No, I'm sorry. I'm looking at Pearson when I said that, but still, I don't think he's going to come out and get 28 fantasy points. So I feel like if people see that, and maybe that plays into the chalkiness, and also that he's a little bit cheaper than Butler. But between the two, I like Hakeem. Moving on here, Deon Cain does stand out a little bit as a pairing option with Adrian Martinez. He needs to score a touchdown though to pay off. So at 8.1K, I'm not really feeling that. And Martinez does tend to spread the ball out, so I don't know if you have to go out of your way to pair, but especially since he can do a lot of damage on the ground too. So what if he just spreads it out and throws a touchdown to his backup tight end, or a running back, or a 4th string wide receiver? You just never know what he's going to do. And then he runs in 1 or 2, or just his only scores are runs. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you have to force Deon Cain. He's not a high volume guy, and he doesn't really get the job done if he's not scoring a touchdown. I think he's fine at 8.1K, but when I'm paying up for Hakeem Butler for the maximum ceiling here, I don't feel hard pressed to go force Deon Cain. That said, he's coming in with 11% ownership, and he does still have one of the best projections of any wide receiver on the slate. So if you are playing Adrian Martinez, it is a little bit interesting to stack with him a guy who's low owned and obviously would correlate positively with him. Marlon Williams obviously is another option to pair with Adrian Martinez. Very hit or miss, hasn't had 10 plus fantasy points in any of his last 3 games, but he has shown a little bit of a ceiling at times. One guy I was talking about for Birmingham not too long ago was Kevin Austin. And of course, the week I talked about him, he had 0 fantasy points. The next game, he had 4.7 fantasy points, but he has definitely flashed. He had 2 games with over 14 fantasy points. He's another guy that he probably needs to be catching one of those touchdowns to pay off. But I do think as a value at 5.1K, he's a little bit interesting for GPPs. The only guy here that I actually feel comfortable with is Jay Sternberger. We know he is a red zone threat. He's been productive in the past, and he has 2 touchdowns in his last 2 games, 13 plus fantasy points in that stretch. All these guys for Birmingham are pretty touchdown dependent because, like I said, Martinez spreads it out pretty well. But Sternberger is one of his main target earners. He had 9 targets 2 games ago, and he's going to be one of the guys he looks for in the red zone. So at 6.5K, I think he's a pretty good play, pretty good value. And he faces a Michigan defense that was 6th against tight ends on the year, so that's also helpful. Moving right along, if we look at just the projections, I mean, nobody really pops. Darius Shepard's carrying ownership at 28%. His projection is under 9. He is 5.9K though, so that's a pretty good price. And anytime you can get somebody paired with AJ McCarron, you have to look at it. But if I'm paying for Hakeem Butler, I don't see why I would go get Darius Shepard there with such a low ceiling and honestly pretty low floor. If you go and look at his game log, it's pretty gross. But if you don't want to play Hakeem Butler and you want to get a value play, that is possible leverage on Hakeem Butler for sure. I'm not sure that's the best way to do it, but it's certainly an option. Honestly, because Ja'Cory Pearson obviously is on his team too. That's the guy I'd probably go first to if you want to gain leverage. But for me, it's kind of Hakeem Butler or bust as far as St. Louis's passing game goes. As far as value goes, if you're even starting to consider Darius Shepard just because of his price, I would just drop down a little bit further and look at guys like Justin Smith or Trey Quinn. We just know that they are more likely to get the ball a little bit more. Trey Quinn has 5 plus targets in each of his last 2 games. Not really a touchdown threat, but he did score 2 games ago. Just more of a target earner guy who, if he can get 5 plus targets, he could end up paying off that 5.4K price tag. Justin Smith, 6 plus targets in each of his last 2 games. He did nothing with his targets last game, but the game before he had 15 fantasy points. So it's just all about these guys are going to be on the field. They're going to get 5 plus targets, and they're cheap. So I think they're pretty viable. If I had to have a lean, I'd go with Trey Quinn just because he's got the softer matchup facing the defense that ranks 6th against wide receivers on the year. So I think they're both viable, though. As we go down further, there's nobody really that stands out as far as like an expensive play that I feel like I have to get to. As you can see, they're not projecting super well. The only positive would be that they aren't owned. And by the way, when I'm looking at Justin Smith and Trey Quinn, another differentiator would be Trey Quinn is a fraction of the ownership of Justin Smith. Justin Smith coming at 37%, Trey Quinn at 16%. I mean, Justin Smith is a totally fine play, like I already said. So I'm not surprised that one of them is really chalky right now because they're both really cheap and they look like decent plays. But I think I would lean Trey Quinn there. As far as straight, Austin here again, he's carrying a tiny bit of ownership for as far as punts go at 5.1K. He just is a guy that not going to get a ton of opportunity, but he's very athletic, very explosive. So if he can take one ball and hit a home run for us here at 5.1K, that could be a monster GPP play. Trying to see if there's anybody else that really stands out. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of injuries to the point where it's going to open up a lot of extra value on this slate. So I am personally looking to go get those beasts that I feel really, really good about either having a chance to, match their projection or, hit their ceiling. So I'm looking at Adrian Martinez, I'm looking at Morgan Ellison, and I'm looking at Hakeem Butler right away to build my team. And those 3 guys together are still reasonably chalky. Adrian Martinez and Morgan Ellison are the most chalky plays at their respective positions. I'm okay with that. I don't really care. Hakeem Butler is chalky, but only 34%. That's not that chalky for a 2-game slate. I would imagine, especially with a 2-game slate, and once you get into like single entry tourneys, that number is going to tick up. But if you're talking about him and Kirkland both being chalky, and if Butler's going to be less chalky, Butler to me is the play by miles. So then to fill out the rest of this roster, if I go down and get my guy Trey Quinn that I'm rolling with at 5.4K, and then I'm going to take a stand and just take a shot on Austin as my main pairing for a stack with Adrian Martinez, then I have 7.3K left, and I can come back here. And it does kind of leave me in a little bit of no man's land, especially since, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, I'll probably slot in Birmingham against Danny Etling, just because I don't have a lot of faith in Danny Etling. And then where does that leave me? That could leave me with Marcus Sims, maybe. Pretty touchdown dependent. Not sure how I feel about that. Ricky Person splitting the work. It's viable, but Marcel Aitman could be a leverage play on Hakeem Butler if you weren't playing Hakeem Butler. But I might just eat some salary here, honestly, and then go and double up with a stack with Jay Sternberger to pair with Adrian Martinez. So that's how I'm going to end my lineup right now. I'm going with Adrian Martinez, Morgan Ellison, Hakeem Butler, Trey Quinn, Kevin Austin Jr., Jay Sternberger, and the Stallions defense. If the ownership sticks as is, we're eating 3 really good chalky pieces at a high level that we should feel pretty comfortable about. And we're getting 3 guys. I don't think Sternberger is that owned. Not owned at all. So he doesn't really project that well. So to be fair, and neither is Austin, but they look like and Trey's going to be somewhat owned, 17%. But those 2 guys are tournament winners if they hit. So I feel pretty good about those guys. All right. So that's going to do it for me. Obviously, you can still play the ownership game yourself. You can absolutely ignore my advice on Butler and go play Kirkland or Pearson. Or you can also ignore Trey Quinn and go pay $700 more for Darius Shepard, who's 28% owned, or pivot from Trey Quinn to Justin Smith, and so on and so forth. I would watch the status of Anthony McFarland, though. If he is in, even if he's limited, that would definitely provide a hit on Morgan Ellison, even at that 7.2K price tag. All right, so hopefully it helps you out a little bit. You have my exact lineup that I'm rolling with, and you have all the plays that I like and don't like. So hopefully you can take that and apply it to your own process and figure out some lineups that you like and have some success this weekend playing UFL DFS. Also, there is a NBA video for the NBA Finals Game 2 for the Showdown slate, so you can check that out at the end of this video. But thanks for watching, and if I helped you in any way, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Helps the community grow, helps me know that I'm helping you out, and it helps you get alerted to future videos like this and for other sports too. So definitely do that. But yeah, thanks for watching and good luck.